What we can tell you is it was an emotional sense in the courtroom and the overflow rooms, packed, standing room only. It was really clear that once the note had been passed down, at first people didn't know what that note was going to say, right? But quickly the overflow room started filling up with attorneys, with legal interns. And that's usually the main sign that something big is happening. And in fact, some people were on their knees. There was really no room at all. It was just that packed, a lot of tension. And then when the first count was announced as not guilty, an audible response, people applauding, people sighing out loud, people expressing relief that there was a not guilty verdict on the first count. And the same thing happened on the second count. But when that third count of Mann Act violation was guilty, well, that was a very different mood. And then when we had the two different guilty verdicts, definitely a somber mood. However, as has been pointed out already, this is going to be appealed. And the very first thing that we saw this morning was one of Sean Diddy Combs' attorneys, who's a specialist in appeals, was right there. He began the day in the courtroom when no other prosecuting attorneys were there and very few of his own attorneys were there. The marshals allowed him to come in, sit, read a few notes. Then he got up, turned to his family that had come in, which were in the first two rows, said something to them. Then they all prayed. They prayed for a favorable outcome. They all held hands. Sean Diddy Combs led that prayer. When it was over, his family applauded. He went out of the courtroom and then within an hour was brought back to hear this verdict be read in front of him. And I could tell you, you could hear a pin drop in all of the rooms involved, the main courtroom, the overflow rooms. It was very intense and ultimately surprising. We'll go through those counts one more time. By the way, this is the verdict sheet for the case. This is the verdict sheet that the jurors had to fill out, and they handed to the deputy, the court deputy, who gave it to the judge, and then the judge gave it back to the deputy, and then asked the jury foreperson if it was a unanimous verdict. And the answer was that it was. And again, those verdicts on count one, racketeering conspiracy, not guilty. On count two, sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura, as it's listed in the court document, count two, not guilty. Count three of Mann Act transportation for Cassandra Ventura, guilty. On count four, sex trafficking of Jane Doe, one of the witnesses who testified in this case, that was not guilty, the jurors concluded. And on count five of Mann Act transportation of Jane Doe, guilty in this case. We'll talk much more about the Mann Act, but basically it involves transporting a person across state lines for illegal sex acts. The jurors concluding and filling out this form saying guilty on Mann Act violations in the cases of both women, Jane Doe and Cassie Ventura. Clearly, there was a sense of relief in the courtroom that became more tense when those guilty verdicts were announced. A very, very intense and tense situation here. And outside of court, let's take a quick look. A lot of people here, a lot of supporters of Sean Diddy Combs, many of them in the courtroom upstairs and the overflow rooms where we've been all morning. They are the ones who are expressing the most vocal reactions to these verdicts, and they are waiting for every development following. There will be much more throughout the morning with attorneys from Sean Combs expected to come out and talk about next steps. of which there may be many. As we also pointed out, a specialist on his team in appeals has been here since the day began and has been here throughout the trial, certainly, but is clearly looking at next steps for her client. We will have much more from here outside of federal court in Lower Manhattan, where right now we're reporting live. I'm James Ford, Pix 11 News. Back to you.